Davis. We begin tonight's debate with a 30-second opening statement from each of the candidates, and based on random selection, Democratic nominee Ned Lamont will get things started. Mr. Lamont, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you, Ann, and I know that a little bit of rain will never dampen the spirits of a guard crowd. I appreciate the energy there. I love Connecticut, but we have a lot of work we've got to do. The middle class is getting slammed, not enough good-paying jobs, and we seem to be in a chronic fiscal crisis. No need to play the blame game. We know it's been a bipartisan fiscal wreck, political wreck for a long, long time. I'm going to be somebody that brings real change to how we do business. I'd be the first business guy in a generation to lead this state. That's what we need.
Thank you so much. Mr. Stefanowski.
Thank you, Ann. Dan Malloy has absolutely ruined this state and the economy. And we're losing our friends and family by the day. And Ned Lamont, it's actually going to be worse. He's going to try to deny it tonight, but he's been on radio saying he's going to raise taxes and put up tolls. Ladies and gentlemen, enough is enough. I'm going to lower taxes. I'm going to reduce spending. I'm going to bring back fiscal discipline. I'm going to create jobs to bring our friends and family back to Connecticut.
All right, thank you both, gentlemen. Paul, first question for you, sir.
Both our candidates mentioned the budgetary challenges the state faces, so I wanted to begin with that. According to the Office of Fiscal Analysis, this state faces deficits for several years into the future. By 2023, Connecticut will confront a $3.7 billion deficit with the expenses outpacing the revenues by some 17%. I mean, given those kind of numbers, are you gentlemen being honest when, in Mr. Lamont's case, you talk about cutting property taxes, and Mr. Stefanowski, you talk about cutting the income tax?
I took on Dan Malloy 8 years ago because I knew that we had to make big structural changes to get our budget back under control. And I challenged them then, and I'm going to make those big structural changes now. Bob wasn't even there to vote against them, and I was there fighting every day. Look, I've got a property tax cut that I've paid for, which is the #1 tax paid by the vast majority of the people in this room. Bob's got a tax that will benefit the millionaires by far and just bankrupt our towns and cities. I hope we have a chance, Paul, to talk in specifics about how we reduce costs in this state, because first and foremost, that's what I'm going to do. We have 3 big buckets of costs. One is in terms of health care. When it comes to health care, I'm going to use our purchasing power to bring down the high price of drugs and pharmaceuticals. Do what we can, go out to bid with the PBMs just like they did in New Jersey. Do what we can on the Medicaid side to keep people out of nursing homes at their own home, our seniors, our parents. That saves us a dramatic amount of money.
Mr. Stefanowski, 90 seconds.
You're going to see it all night, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Lamont is going to try to distance himself from Dan Malloy. The reality is his economic plan is exactly the same as the horrible economic policy we've suffered under the last 8 years. Do you know how large his property tax cut is? $100. He's going to give people back $10 a month. At the same time, he's going to put up tolls that cost people hundreds of dollars a month. He's going to raise income taxes, and he's going to bring a statewide auto tax. If you want higher taxes, vote for Mr. Lamont. If you want lower taxes, if you want fiscal discipline, I'm going to call a fiscal state of emergency my first week in office. Not because a hurricane's coming, but this state is in an absolute fiscal crisis. Dan Malloy and Ned Lamont's spending is out of control. I will get it back under control. I will cut the budget. I will cut spending. I will use those cuts to fund a cut to the income tax. That'll bring jobs, that'll be people, that'll bring more disposable income, and that will grow the tax revenues in the long run. We need to do exactly the opposite of what Dan Malloy has been doing for the last 8 years, and Mr. Lamont will just continue it.
Mr. Lamont, your rebuttal, 30 seconds.
Paul, your newspaper called Bob's tax plan a fantasy. Hearst papers called it right out of la-la land. You're not reducing the income tax. You said you were going to eliminate over half of our budget, eliminate over half the revenues that support us. That will mean dramatic property tax increases in Norwich, in Coventry, in Willimantic. Those are the biggest taxes that people pay. I have a targeted property tax cut that will make it easier for our seniors to stay in their home and easier for young people to move into the state so we can get jobs back.
All right, thank you. Sassy, your question.
Thank you. The contract with state unions providing for benefits and pensions is locked in through 2027, a provision the legislature provided in return for various concessions. As governor, would you honor this contract or seek in some fashion to reopen it in pursuit of further concessions?
Thank you, Sassy. Again, just when you hear it tonight, when Mr. Lamont says property tax cut, $100 a year. We're going to spend more time talking about it tonight than it's worth. In terms of the CBAC agreement, we are not, this pension plan is $100 billion underfunded. It's almost $30,000 per man, woman, and child in the state of Connecticut. Mr. Lamont claims to be the friend of the union. By lying to the unions and telling them that money is going to be there is not the answer. I don't mean to be mean-spirited about it. We need to protect people's retirement. We need to give them good health care. But the checks are going to start to bounce. It is classic of bureaucrats like Mr. Lamont to do that, and Dan Malloy's been doing it for 8 years. We need to sit down at the table. We need to have a fair compromise, and we need to give state employees the security that at least something will be there. It's only fair to them to do it, and it's not fair to avoid reality.
Mr. Lamont, your rebuttal, 90 seconds.
Bob's idea of fairness is to eliminate the income tax for himself, eliminate the inheritance tax for himself, and put all the burden on the state employees. And Sassy, you're never going to get people to the table with that type of a one-sided deal. I do have the respect of labor, and I respect labor. I know that we entered into a contract many years ago with them, and they have done nothing wrong. It's the fact that we had governors on both sides of the aisle going back a generation that didn't put a dime in. What does that mean? That still means we get back to the table. That means business and labor will be at the table. That means I sit down and look people in the eye. I say we're going to have to make fundamental changes in terms of how we change benefits going forward, both on the health care side, as I tried to suggest before, as well as on the pension side. It's absolutely true that we can no longer have our liabilities going up faster than our assets. You need somebody who's got the credibility with labor to sit down at the table and say, we're actually doing this to protect the next generation of workers. What we can do on the asset side, put more assets into there. Put the lottery into the teachers' pension fund so the teachers have some confidence that the money will be there going forward. We have billions of dollars of real estate. What is Connecticut doing with 4,000 buildings? That ought to be under private management in a REIT. Put some of that into the state employee fund. And on the other side, we're going to have to slow the rate of increase when it comes to pension obligations. Look, I would put things on the table. I would put double dipping on the table. How long can we continue to do that? And our legislators, you know, how long are they going to be able to put car mileage into their pension obligations? I'm willing to put everything on the table to get the job done.
Mr. Stefanowski, 30 seconds, please.
So there you go. You know, a bunch of superficial ideas. The reality is we have a $100 billion problem. We probably can't treat it prospectively. We probably need to look at the existing benefits to solve this problem. But again, Mr. Lamont, you are not doing, you say that you're the friend of the union. Lying to people and telling them that money's going to be there when we both know it's not going to be there. There is money we can save around the state. We should use it to fund our pension plans. We should use it for a tax cut. But I challenge you to find $100 billion that we're going to be able to use to fund that pension plan. It is not going to happen, and we need to admit that. And until we admit it, we can't solve it.
Mark Davis, your question, please.
All right, gentlemen, and everybody knows this. Every state around us has some sort of highway or bridge tolls. Connecticut and Vermont are the only states in the region without them. Electronic tolling technology means there is no longer a safety issue at toll plazas. Last session, state lawmakers discussed instituting electronic highway tolls married with a reduction, a cut in the gasoline tax. Would you favor some sort of variation of this idea to fund state transportation and infrastructure improvements?
No new tolls.
That's not the question. That's not the question.
Repeat
the question was,
please.
Do you favor some variation of a proposal to impose taxes, tolls rather, coupled with a cut in the gasoline tax? That was the proposal that legislators talked about. They never voted on it, but that's what was floated. That is to impose tolls and cut the gas tax. Do you support some variation of that?
We should probably look at cutting the gas tax, because the problem is, Mark, they don't use that money to fix the roads. They use it to raid in the general fund. We should absolutely not put tolls up. I think it's Mr. Lamont's running mate that said we could raise $3 billion a year with tolls. Tolls are just another tax. This state has been taxed like you've never seen. And the Democrats and Ned Lamont and Dan Malloy, they think if we just put one more tax in, it's going to solve our problem.
How would you cut the gas tax without finding money for somewhere else to pay the bonds to improve the roads?
We need to bring the private sector in, Mark. There is a ton of private sector money out there that's waiting to invest in roads and bridges. Other states have done it. We can do it in the state of Connecticut. We cannot continue to do things on the back of the hard-working taxpayers of Connecticut. We've been doing it for 8 years. We've proven that it doesn't work. We lose federal funding if we put up tolls. Only 30% of the people on I-95 are out of state. I mean, I could go on for hours. What did
Thank you for your answer,
Well,
Mr.
I could go on for hours.
Lamont. But you can't.
I can't. I'd like to go on for hours.
Mark, the point is that when Bob was at the 3I Fund, and they did fund roads and bridges work with private contractors, you know how they paid for it? With tolls. Even private enterprises need a way to get a return on their investment. Unlike what Bob says, I have been very specific. I would put tolls on the big tractor trailers coming in and out of this state, just like I do right next door in Rhode Island.
What about marrying it to a cut in the gas tax? That's the rest of the question.
And when we can cut that gas tax, I would do that at the same time, absolutely. But our location used to be a great strategic advantage for this state. The gateway to New England, the gateway to the Middle Atlantic states, rebuilding our ports, more frequent regular rail service. And right now we have a transportation fund that is going bankrupt. And I have a credible way. Look, Bob and the Republicans have all said they're going to borrow their way to do this, or somehow the private sector will build it and they don't care about how they get compensated for it. You know, that is just right out of fantasy land. And I can tell you what we're going to do. If we do this strictly, in a lockbox, right for transportation, that's $100 to $150 million a year.
Please.
And that will go to transportation. That will go to more frequent rail service in Shoreline East. That will go to fix our roads and bridges. It's long overdue. I have a way to do it. I've honestly said how I'm going to pay for it. I haven't heard a thing about how you pay for any of his promises.
All right, rebuttal, 30 seconds. Mr. Stefanowski. Mr. Stefanowski, your rebuttal, please.
You know, you got to love this lockbox idea. You know. It's classic Ned Lamont. He talks about the DMV. What are we going to do at the DMV? We're going to upgrade the computer systems. We spent $20 million 2 years ago to upgrade the computer systems. It's time for a change. The last time we had a lockbox, we raided it. Why is this lockbox going to be any different? You've got politician after politician giving these catchphrases that they're going to live up to their stump speeches. They're not. You cannot trust this guy to do what he's going to tell you he's going to do. You simply can't, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, Paul, the next question in, please. Paul, the next question in, please ask who this question is going to right off the start. Who is your question for?
Mr. Stefanowski.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Lamont has offered some ideas for reducing the budget. You dismissed them as small ball. It's going to take some major league ball to achieve the kind of cuts that would be necessary to begin to eliminate the income tax and also the other taxes you want to cut. So, you know, can we hear some specific ideas of how you would take the state in that direction, working with the legislature?
First of all, people say you can't eliminate the income tax. It's amazing to me that we say we can't do something that we already did. Before 1991, we did not have a state income tax. We were one of the fastest growing economies in the entire nation.
We had the highest sales tax in the region.
We had sales tax, Mark.
The highest sales tax.
We still have a sales tax, and we're always going to have a sales tax. In terms of cost cuts, we have a $40 billion biennial budget. Is there anyone in this audience or watching on TV that don't think I can find 5% of waste, fraud, and abuse in the Connecticut budget right now? When I was at UBS, I was the chief financial officer. I used zero-based budgeting. I had every department come in. I said, I don't care what was in your budget last year. Here's an idea. It's zero. And we only added back in what you absolutely had to have. We took out $1 billion of cost. I can take $1 billion of cost out of this budget for the state of Connecticut. We can use that to fund a tax cut, and that will increase tax revenues over the long run. The exact opposite what Dan Malloy has been doing, which is raising the tax rate, and the revenues are coming down.
Mr. Lamont, your rebuttal.
Again, no specifics except find that line item for waste, fraud, and abuse. And that is just the type of political answer that has gotten this state into trouble over the last generation. You know, John Rowland said, I'm going to eliminate the income tax. He inherited a surplus and wasn't able to do it. It represents over 50% of our revenues. I am not going to raise the income tax. I'm going to live within our means. But you were right to say this is right out of la-la land. And you know why it's so disruptive to the business community? The one thing they want more than anything else is a reliable and predictable budget on time, not going through budget hell every 2 years like Bob's plan would do. Every 2 years trying to figure out how we can paper over the deficit one more time. I'm not going to let that happen. Look, I can say what happened at UBS. You know, UBS, sure, they got bailed out for billions and billions of dollars when they weren't able to pay their bills back in 2008, 2009. People don't bail out the state of Connecticut. We're going to have to be honest with the voters, honest with the taxpayers, show them how we're going to reduce spending, show them how we're going to balance this budget, and get a balanced budget on time. That is the most important thing going forward. You know, from there, I can see other taxes that we'll be able to reduce, other ways that we'll be able to get rid of the business conveyance tax, other ways that we can show people that we're serious about taxes in this state. But first, I am going to balance the budget. He's going to create fiscal mayhem.
Mr. Stefanowski, excuse me. Mr. Stefanowski, 30 seconds.
Mr. Lamont talks about honesty. 45 days ago, he was on WPLR. They asked him the direct question, are you going to raise taxes? He started to stumble, and they said, I'll repeat the question, are you going to raise taxes? The answer was yes. 30 seconds ago, we hear that he's not going to raise taxes. I'm not sure which Ned Lamont to agree, but I can tell you, I will not raise taxes. Our current governor said 4 years ago he would not raise taxes, and he did. We will get the tax rate down, we will eliminate the state income tax over 8 years, and we will get this economy moving again.
Thank you. Sassy, your question for whom?
Mr. Lamont. Governor Malloy has pursued changes in the criminal justice system, also known as the Second Chance Initiative, to keep more defendants out of prison while awaiting trial, giving prisoners a chance to earn early release by way of education and training, and trying to get more defendants into treatment rather than prison. He says a dropping prison population and lower crime rates prove that it's working. Do you agree that it's working? And what changes would you seek?
I agree that it's working. It gives folks a second chance. It has not resulted in any increase in crime. In fact, our crime rates are at an all-time low in this state. And Sassy, it has saved us hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm still looking for one idea of how Bob would pay for his $10 billion tax cut, which puts our state into fiscal mayhem. It would be disruptive to our budget and disruptive to anybody trying to figure out how they can invest and grow in this economy right now. Criminal justice reform, done properly, done carefully, remembering that security and safety on our streets is priority number one, has been a success over the last 8 years, and I'm going to continue to follow that carefully and see if we can save some more revenues, more dollars that way.
Mr. Stefanowski, 90 seconds.
So, Sassy, I'm all for giving people a second chance. I honestly am, and I think there's a bunch of people that deserve a second chance. The problem with the program as it's currently structured is almost 50% of the people that are released early are accused and committed of another crime. And you want to talk about cost. The amount of cost to do that again after they've already been in prison is extraordinary. You want to talk about the safety of our people out there. Some of these people that have been released early have committed violent crimes again. We need to look at that program. Again, I am all for giving people with good behavior a second chance, but that program is out of control. It's costing the state more money in the long run, and it's putting our citizens at risk. We need to look at it again.
Bob is absolutely wrong on that. Our crime is at an all-time low. The recidivism rate is an all-time low. And I'm still looking for a couple of ideas of how we might save money to pay for that $10 billion tax cut. I've given you a number one.
Thank you. Next question, Mark.
Gentlemen, both of you have visited northeastern Connecticut recently to visit homes and check out the basements of homes with crumbling foundations. This is a multi-billion-dollar problem. The real estate agents will tell you that next week. It has impacted thousands of homes across Connecticut because those foundations were built with concrete containing the mineral pyrrhotite, which expands with moisture and causes foundations to crack. The question is, who's responsible for this, and what is your solution to the problem?
We start with Mr. Stefanowski.
Bob.
Yeah, so I'll try to answer your question that you asked, Mark, rather than editorializing on another question. This is a big problem. I was out there a couple weeks ago. These homeowners are on severe duress. And I don't think there's an easy solution to it. I do think we need to test homes for people that are willing to have their homes tested to see what level of this chemical is problematic. Once again, we're trying to do a patchwork solution to a real problem. We need to assess how big a problem we have. The solution is going to be a combination of probably some state money. The insurance companies need to step up to the bar. The mortgage holders need to step up to the bar. And quite honestly, if we had a better relationship with Washington than some of my counterparts have, we might actually be able to get federal funding to help us, because this does fall under the parameters of FEMA. And it just shows the value of having a governor who has some sort of relationship with Washington. But I think we need to size it up. We need to determine how big the situation is, and then we need to help the homeowners that have been damaged by this horrible activity.
Mr. Lamont, 90 seconds.
Well, there's no question you have a very close relationship with Donald Trump and vice versa. And the headline said, after Bob visited the folks with the Crumbling Foundations, Bob, the Crumbling Foundations folks dropped dead. And let me tell you, these are people's homes. It represents potentially tens of thousands of homes, an entire region of the state, a part of the region where the grand list is sinking, the value of their homes are sinking. This is their nest egg and what they have. And you have an obligation as a governor to show leadership here. There's absolutely no question that the state of Connecticut and the taxpayers cannot fix this by themselves, and that's not going to happen. But there's also no question that we have to fix it. And as a governor, I would take the lead. I would go to the insurance companies. I say, look, you're at the table. There's some litigation risk here. I think you're going to be part of the solution. I would bring the banks to the table and say nothing worse than sitting on a foreclosed home that's empty. I think you're going to be part of the solution. Ben Carson was up. Maybe I'd send Bob Stefanowski down to talk to the Trump administration and see if we can get a little bit of support from FEMA as well. But it's really a question of attitude when Bob said that. He's also said, I want to eliminate the minimum wage. It's a sort of, you're on your own, baby, and that's not what Connecticut is. Those are not what Connecticut values are, and that won't be the Connecticut when I'm your governor.
Mr. Stefanowski, 30 seconds. 30 seconds, sir.
I wish I had more than 30 seconds to answer all the non-truths in those statements, but unfortunately I don't. I'll tell you, the homeowners I met with, Ned, when I asked them what the top 3 things we could do to fix it, they said, thank God somebody's out here who has common sense. Because the other person that was out here just wanted to talk about setting up yet another commission and having a bunch of rhetoric around it. They want tangible action. This is the difference between a politician and a business person who could come in. Let's size up the issue. Let's get every party to step to the table, and let's get this situation fixed rather than just talking about it.
So then you favor the $10 surcharge on our homeowners policies, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
You favor the $10 surcharge on our insurance policies?
Mark, I guess it's okay. It raises 15 to 20 million. This is a billion-dollar problem. This is a patch we're putting on a problem that's much bigger than anyone's willing to admit right now.
Mr. Lamont, you care to weigh in on that?
We have to see exactly what that problem is, finding out what that would be. But I'm tired of this businessman versus a politician. I'm the only person that actually started a job and created business, and that's where I focused my life for 35 years. And along the way, I was very involved in the state, teaching, working on getting emphasis here. You weren't even able to vote, and you worked for 3 companies. Each of what you say you're going to do for Connecticut, what you did for those companies, those buildings are sitting empty now, and they all live with a bailout. That's not our future.
All right, and on that note,
I need to answer that, Ann. I need to answer that.
Gentlemen, you have 6 questions under your belt. I think we have a first start. We're going
And
to
you do
take
need
a
to give me,
2-minute break.
you do need to let me answer that, please.
All right, I will yield to you. You have 30 seconds.
You know why these buildings are empty, Ned? Because of the horrible economic policy and tax pressure that Dan Malloy and people like you want to put on the state. You know what Infosys does? They outsource jobs to India. Ned's proud of bringing Infosys here. It's moving hundreds of jobs out of the state of Connecticut to India. He brags about his cable company. In the last year, the cable company, he laid off 70% of employees and paid himself a $500,000 bonus. So Ned, you want to talk about the past and our experience? I'm happy to do it all night. But what the people want to hear is who's got the best plan to fix this economy, who's going to turn around the damage that Dan Malloy has exhibited, and I'm quite comfortable that I'm the agent of change and you're not.
All right. 30 seconds.
Just like Donald Trump, Bob Stefanowski has no concept of the truth. What happened to UBS is they lost hundreds of billions of dollars on his watch. They took handouts from the state, and then they left their main building. That's a building that's sitting empty.
That one I don't even need to answer, and let's move on.
All right, gentlemen, and on that note,
Okay.
we're going to take a 2-minute break. We're off to a rousing start with more. Let's get to our panel, and the next question will be from Paul Chenier. Has to do with education, and this question will go to Mr. Lamont. Paul.
I have to apologize. I'm going to ask another question not related to education. Sorry, Ann.
I will yield. Go
and it's to Mr. Lamont. Is that correct?
Yes. Mr.
Yeah, we've had some, progress perhaps on, where budget cuts can be found, and we have someone in the audience today that suggested one place that the state might begin. It happens to be Mr. Stefanowski's running mates, State Senator Joe Markley, and he has pointed to eliminating the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunity as one place to reduce state spending, noting that citizens would still have the recourse to sue in the court and that it's arguably a redundant agency. So starting with Mr. Lamont, is that one place perhaps we could start in reducing the size of our government?
Let me just say, first of all, the last section ended with a false slam on me, and all I can do was urge you to read what the Hartford Courant said about the same attack that Joe Ganim and Bob Stefanowski said about my company. We worked together for 35 years. These folks are like family. In good times and bad, we worked together. And I didn't get a bailout from anybody. In tough times, we had to tighten our belts and get the job done. And that's probably a concept that Bob doesn't understand as those layoff notices kept going. Look, Joe Markley's idea of a cut is just an ideological cut. It doesn't make any difference in terms of the budget. It's not the type of thing I would do. I want to stand up for Connecticut values. I want to stand up for human rights, and he's trying to make a statement by that type of a cut. And look, this is the same type of thing we see coming out of the Trump administration. When it comes to the environment, when it comes to women's reproductive rights, when it comes to a lot of our liberties that we want to protect, a governor can actually be a firewall there to protect those liberties from what's happening in Washington, D.C. I think you know where I stand on those issues. You're going to have to ask where Bob and Joe stand on those issues.
Mr. Stefanowski, 90 seconds. Mr. Stefanowski.
So we're going to look at all the agencies, and one thing I can tell you, I guarantee you there's too many. I guarantee you that, and I can guarantee you there's too many people in each of the agencies, and we're going to look at them across the board. We're going to do it with zero-based budgeting. We're going to start with a zero budget, and we're going to add back in what we absolutely need to have. We're going to fund education. Mr. Lamont likes to hit me on education. We're going to continue to fund education. Unlike Mr. Lamont, I'm a product of the public schools. I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. My dad went to Hill House High. I had opportunity in this state that everybody should have. The public schools were great for me. I worked at General Electric. I worked at Price Waterhouse. I was able to build a family, a life, and a career here. The tax regime of Dan Malloy and what Ned Lamont wants to continue is going to ruin that opportunity for everybody. It is time for change, ladies and gentlemen. This state is being taxed to death. People are leaving. Our friends are leaving. Our grandchildren are leaving. Our parents are leaving. And under my administration, we're going to get things back in order. We're going to gradually cut taxes. We're going to reduce regulation. We're going to create jobs. We're going to make it like it was when I graduated from high school in 1980, a state of opportunity where our young people want to be again. Ned Lamont is going to do the exact opposite.
Mr. Lamont, 30 seconds. Please, please. Mr. Lamont.
I have no idea if this guy's going to cut anything at this point, except for maybe a commission that maybe costs $50,000. It's just poppycock. And look, I appreciate zero-based budgeting, but this is not GE. If you have a losing division, you just can't sell it or get rid of it. This is social services. This is education. This is corrections. These are things you need somebody with an entrepreneurial spirit to help make these things run more efficiently, streamline them, make the changes you need to do to bring down those high costs. And that's what I mean to do.
Sassy, your question for Mr. Stefanowski.
Yes, thank you. The next question is about retirement, and appropriately, it was submitted by Nora Duncan. She's the state director of AARP. In 2016, the Connecticut Retirement Security Program was created. It will give over save for retirement at work through payroll deductions. According to AARP Public Policy Institute, employees are 15 times more likely to save merely by having access to payroll deduction. If elected, what is your commitment to continuing the implementation of this program?
Mr. Stefanowski, please, 60 seconds.
We should have access to payroll deduction. You look at one of the issues with the state employee pension plan is it's a defined benefit plan. Who has a defined benefit plan left today? We need to move towards 401k plans. You know, Mr. Lamont likes to make fun of the people in Washington. Look where the stock market is today. I'm sure Mr. Lamont is benefiting from it. That's an example of what sound economic policy at a national level can do for an economy. Cutting taxes, putting America first, recutting all the lousy deals that the prior administrations have put into place.
Please, please, please.
As opposed to more of the same, tax and spend, let's add a toll, let's add a tax, and suddenly we're going to get a different answer than we've had over the last 8 years under the horrible economic policy of Dan Malloy. That's what you're going to get here, a continuation of that.
Mr. Lamont, and I'm going to ask that you don't applaud, please. This is taking your candidate's time. Thank you. Mr. Lamont.
The vaunted Trump tax plan that Bob salutes, what happened to the Republicans? It used to be the party of fiscal conservatives. This is now a tax plan that will cost probably close to $1 trillion a year in deficits as far as the eye can see. And Bob, we can't do that. We have to balance our budget in this state, something that politicians don't understand. I was hoping a business person would. It's also a Trump tax plan that costs the state of Connecticut well over $1 billion by eliminating the opportunity to deduct state and local taxes. This is a state that already sends a lot more money to Washington than we get back. That compounds the problem. Sassy, to your bigger question, yes, we have to do everything we can, not just in the public sector, but to give privates an opportunity and incentive to save for their retirement. Our retirement used to be our home, used to be Social Security, and used to be a pension. The pension is something that's at risk in terms of many places around the country, and something I'm trying to shore up in as prudent and thoughtful and fiscally conscious a way as I can. And I'll just tell you one other thing with the Trump tax plan. What do you think that's going to do to Medicare? What do you think that's going to do to Social Security? The next big cut they're going to be looking for is going to be subsidizing tax cuts for the wealthiest citizens and taking it out of the folks that need that most for their retirement security. I'm not going to let that happen in Connecticut.
Mark Davis, please. Mark Davis, your question for Mr. Lamont.
I thought I had 30 seconds, no?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Ann.
Bob, you have 30 seconds. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. You know the best way to solve all these problems, whether it's retirement savings or entitlements, it's a good economy. And you know why we have a problem with the new tax plan coming out of Washington? It's because we have a state income tax. That's why we're going to get rid of it. Mr. Lamont loves to push blame onto Washington. He'll talk about hours for what's happened in Washington. You know what, ladies and gentlemen? People care about what's going on in Connecticut. They want to fix this economy. He has no plan. He's more of the same. So he'll spend the next 20 minutes talking about everything other than how we fix the state economy.
All right, thank you very much. Mark, your question for Mr. Lamont.
Hi, this is another question that came from a News 8 viewer, Kevin. He says, with the state deficit growing larger and without an appetite for tax increases or tolls, will you legalize recreational marijuana like other states around us?
Please,
as a new source of tax revenue for Connecticut, especially since some polling shows 70% or more of state residents are in favor of it?
Is that
Mr.
to me,
Lamont
Mark?
first.
Yes.
60 seconds.
Yes.
The answer to that is yes, Mark. All of our neighbors have legalized marijuana. We do this carefully. We regulate it. And it is another source of revenue for this state. And it's the type of things we have to do to think creatively to get this state going again. I think it creates an incredible disrespect for the law, the way it's unequally applied, especially to folks of color in our cities and as such. That is something that I would definitely...
Please, please, please. No outbursts. You're taking away from your candidate's time. Continue, sir.
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Stefanowski.
Yeah, thank you. And I think part of leadership is focusing on what moves the dial. We have fundamental problems in this state. We have a $100 billion underfunded pension plan. We have taxes going up like crazy. Maybe at some point we should look at legalizing marijuana. I'm fine with it for medicinal purposes. The results are still out in Colorado. We still don't have a test for impairment. If somebody's pulled over driving, I'd like to see that first to make sure that our citizens are safe. Maybe at some point we look at it, but we've got so many fundamental economic problems in this state right now. We need to focus on fundamental tax reform. And every time we start talking about tolls or taxes on tires or other things like that, it's taking us away from the main issue, which is get our tax rate down, get jobs up. Start to have home values appreciate again. Give people more money in their pockets so they can fund education, send their kids to school, save for retirement. A vibrant economy is going to get that done. Legalization of marijuana is not going to get it done right now. Let's fix the economy first.
All right, you have, thank you very much. 30 seconds to rebuttal.
When GE left, we got Republicans and Democrats, business and labor together with GE to learn. And they didn't leave to go to Massachusetts because of taxes. They left because they said our transportation system is a mess and they cannot get the next generation of workers they need for this digital economy. Bob's plan would decimate our community colleges, decimate VOTEC, make it tougher for them to be able to hire the people they need to go forward. And I do have a plan to upgrade our transportation system, which was so important to GE before they left.
Paul, your question for Mr. Stefanowski.
Yes, in 2017, shortly after the election of President Trump and his announced plans to be more aggressive in the enforcement of immigration laws, our governor, Governor Malloy, recommended that local police should not enforce federal immigration law and should disregard requests by ICE to retain or question individuals unless those requests were accompanied by a judicial warrant. If elected, would you continue these guidelines or issue new recommendations?
Paul, whenever we start to interpret what laws we're going to enforce and which ones we don't, I think it's a problem. And it just shows you how out of whack this governor is. I've come out against sanctuary cities, not because I'm not sympathetic to the people that are here, but you cannot pick and choose which laws you're going to enforce, and it's symptomatic of this governor that he does that. If you don't like the law, try to change the law. But again, every time we start talking about things other than this, an economy and whether we're going to enforce laws or not, we need to focus on tax reform. I've got to tell you one quick story about GE. You know why GE left, Mr. Lamont? When Dan Malloy came for the final meeting with GE, with Jeff Immelt, to try to convince him to stay in the state, he put a PowerPoint presentation on the table. And there was a picture of a jet engine on the front cover. The only problem was it was a Pratt & Whitney jet engine, not a GE jet engine. This is what politicians do. Do we want more of the same in Hartford, or do we want to change? Tax policy, irresponsible government, that's what drove the company out of the state.
Mr. Lamont, 90 seconds.
Well, by the way, the question was about immigration. And
Please. Thank you. Please.
And we stood up when ICE on the Rio Grande, down on the Mexican border, was separating mothers from their children. And we said, this is wrong. We said, this is not America. This is not what we stand for. And this is not what we want to do in the state of Connecticut. You know, this is a battle about what type of a state we want to be and where we stand. And maybe it's on the environment, maybe it's on reproductive rights, maybe it's on the Trump tax bill. When it comes to immigration, I got to tell you something. America is much stronger for the diversity of the people we have here. I welcome the people who are here in this. I used to teach down at Harding High as a volunteer many years ago, and many of those kids didn't come to this country. They came as dreamers. They didn't speak English, and they were some of the best kids in our class. And I was there teaching them, and I want them to know that they've got a home here. I want them to know that we want them to be productive citizens here in the state of Connecticut. I want them to be tax-paying citizens, and I want them to be able to grow our economy. I think Donald Trump's plan, and I don't know where Bob is on this, is absolutely wrong. And by the way, I don't think you need the mayors doing all of ICE's work. We're doing a heck of a lot of work just trying to keep our streets safe. That would be my priority.
Mr. Stefanowski, 30 seconds.
Yeah, my grandparents came over from Poland. My grandmother worked on the Housatonic River shucking oysters. So I'm very sympathetic to immigration and the challenges that we have. But Mr. Lamont, I'm running for governor of the state of Connecticut. I don't need to go down to the border for a press conference. I am focused on the fundamental reforms that we need in the state of Connecticut.
Please.
You can try to distract us all night and the viewers all night about issues beyond our control. How about we spend the next 10 to 15 minutes talking about how we fix Connecticut?
Sassy. Next question for Mr. Lamont, please.
Thank you. The next question is about the opioid crisis. The epidemic is having a profound impact here in Connecticut. Last year, there were more than 1,000 overdose deaths. And according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, Connecticut is among the top 10 with the highest rate of overdose deaths. What should be Connecticut's most effective use of resources to stem the tide of the crisis? And what do you view as the first priority?
The first priority is to centralized responsibility for the opioid crisis. So we have the Naxalon in one place so that we're able to get it to places where you need it when there's an emergency, as there was in the Green in New Haven just a couple of weeks ago. But there's also some amazing local efforts right here in New London. And as you see what they've done there in terms of how not only do they work with these people, they stay involved with these people as navigators, they follow them through. There are very few places in the country where the opioid crisis, the epidemic, is beginning to recede. And I salute the people of New London, what they've been able to do going forward. And finally, it's going to take mental health support. And I can't stand the fact that we're cutting back on mental health and social services in our schools, something that would be even more severe if we, eliminate over half of our revenues. These are the type of things, look, we have more people dying of opioids than we do in cars and suicide. It's just a tragedy in this country. And you've seen what's going on in our communities across the state. I would take the lead on this. I'd start with a central authority so we can be able to deploy quickly and properly.
Thank you very much. 90 seconds, Mr. Stefanowski.
Well, there it is again. The answer to the problem with government is more government. Let's create a drug czar. Let's create another department. Let's create another bureaucracy when we had over 1,000 people die from the opioid crisis last year. It's time for action. It's not time for centralization and drug czars. It's time for action. Governor Malloy cut the funding for mental health that could have helped this problem. We need to work with the pharmaceutical companies. We need to work with the doctors. We need to work with the insurance companies. We need to look at education. We need to look at what's happening in the families, but we need action. We don't need centralization. We don't need yet another department. We need to move quick on this. It's a real problem. I've got 3 daughters, 24, 19, and 15. We need to address this problem now with tangible solutions. Funding, education, more penalties for people that are dealing with these drugs. Let's put them in jail. Why shouldn't they be in jail?
Please.
We have to stop the crisis with actionable things that we can do now, not make another government agency with a nebulous mission that costs the taxpayers even more money. We don't need a drug czar. We need action.
All right, Mr. Lamont.
Sassy, that's just plain wrong. If we could buy Naxalone centrally, we would be able to save ourselves a lot of money. As you remember what happened in New Haven, there was a crisis there, and people were dropping in the New Haven Green, and they did not have what they needed to get these people cured. If we could centralize that, we would be able to get to the process where we needed it for those people to take care of them as needed. But it is a crisis in this state, and I'm proud to see we're going to use better education and such, but I think you need a governor who takes the lead. I would take the lead.
All right, thank you so much. Mark Davis, you have the last question.
And as we suspected, we'd be near the end, so this is the final question for both of you. Although I suspect maybe we already know the answer to this, but anyway, what question would you most like to ask your opponent? And I guess we go that to Bob.
To Mr. Stefanowski first, please.
It's quite simple, which is, Ed, why do you think continuing the failed economic policies of Dan Malloy over the last 8 years are the right thing to do? This state needs change. You've been on radio and TV saying you're going to raise taxes and you're going to put up tolls. You sound like a clone of Dan Malloy. I'd like for you to explain to the people how you're going to be different, why adding yet another tax is going to have a different impact than the horrible economic process we've seen over the last 8 years. What fresh ideas are you going to bring? And how are you fundamentally going to change this state? It's not putting more taxes on the backs of the hard-working people of Connecticut. We've had 8 years of that. It doesn't work. More of the same.
Mr. Lamont,
The answer to that is easy. I took this guy on because I knew he did not have the ability to make the big structural changes we need to do to get this state back on track. Bob Stefanowski hasn't mentioned one structural change he would do to get this state back on track. Dan Malloy raised taxes. I have said I am going to reduce the property tax, and I can get that done, and I showed how I was going to pay for it. I'm a very different cat. Look, I know what I know and I know what I don't know. I know that I came out of the private sector. I know what it is to work with people. When you're building telecommunication systems, they're not Republicans or Democrats. These are people towards a mission, and that's what I mean to do going forward. I am going to work with Republicans and Democrats in business and labor to get this job done. And I'm not doing this as a stepping stone. I'm not going anywhere else. It's going to be a 4-year job. We honestly balance the budget. I don't make pie-in-the-sky promises to taxpayers that nobody thinks you can keep. I think they know they can take me at my word. And that's a big difference from where we've been, not for the last 8 years, for the last 30 years, as governors on both sides of the aisle made promises and then made no effort to honor them.
What's your question for him?
Yeah, my question for you, Bob, is you care so much about the state, you never got involved. You never even bothered to vote against Dan Malloy. You never even bothered to vote. And now you parachute in and you say, I was a big shot at a bunch of companies that both needed enormous bailouts to get through. You've got a tax plan that would create a $10 billion hole in our budget. A tax plan, a budget hole that would be so big, not even your payday lender would be able to bail us out of that mess.
All right. Mr. Stefanowski.
So I just want to know,
I believe that's
given
more
that
than one question,
background,
Mark. I believe that's 3 questions.
Is he out
Do
of
I have
time?
3 minutes to
Pick
respond?
one.
pick one.
30 seconds.
Listen, I'll address the voting one because I've addressed it before. I was overseas for 10 years. I was laser focused on turning billion-dollar companies around. The state of Connecticut could use that focus, but that's no excuse. I should have filed an absentee ballot. I didn't. I feel bad for it. But I'll tell you what, Mr. Lamont, you've run for office 2 times and lost. You know why there's a lot of disaffected voters out there? It's because of candidates just like you, who have no vision, who want more of the same, and I can tell you, the voters are going to come rumbling back to the polls in November to elect me as the next governor of the state of Connecticut.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I believe we have, I'm going to talk to the producer here. We have a little bit of time left. Let's start with our closing statements now, and I yield to Mr. Lamont first, 30 seconds.
Let me try and change the tone of this debate a little bit. Yesterday, we remembered 9/11. I'm sure that Bob was there. I was at firehouses thanking the first responders who were there, at memorial services. I remember the tragedy of that day, but I also remember that day, faced with a crisis, we all stood together as Americans, and we were united. We weren't Republicans, we weren't Democrats, we weren't business, we weren't labor, we weren't blaming people, we were united. This is a very different situation. We have a crisis. You need a governor who can bring people together, not blame, bring people together to get a solution. That's what I will do.
Mr. Stefanowski, 30 seconds. Please, please. please, please, please. Mr. Stefanowski, 30 seconds, please.
I do think we need to bring people together, and I've been doing it my entire career in the corporate sector. I grew up in New Haven. I know how to negotiate. I know how to build alliances. But this state is in an absolute crisis. And I don't know if anyone in the audience or anyone on the air, if you fundamentally believe that your taxes will not go up under a Malloy administration, does anybody truly believe that? You know, you can talk about getting rid of the state income tax in 8 years, and we'll do it. But I think most people trust that I will work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to reduce this ridiculous tax burden on the state of Connecticut and get our taxes down.
And just really, please, please, stop. One more question, please. One more question for me. If I asked you to sing karaoke, what song would it be? Mr. Lamont.
I think I would sing a little bit of Bob Marley if I had my choice.
Okay, Mr. Stefanowski. Mr. Stefanowski.
To make it easy, I'd probably sing Happy Birthday.
All right, there you have it. All right, we want to thank everybody for attending tonight's debate, both here at the Gard Art Center, and those of you watching on television and online. We will have post-debate analysis for the next hour right here on MyTV9, and a complete wrap-up at 10 and 11. Next Monday evening, News 8 will broadcast another debate from the Schubert Theater in New Haven. You can watch that.